Hey guys, welcome back to a new video, and in this video we're gonna create FireNotes, a note-taking application which utilize Firebase services. So the sole purpose of this video is try to learn Firebase services. So Firebase act as a backend of our Android project. If you're talking about its services, it will provide Firebase authentication where you can authenticate your user, Firebase Firestore, which act as a NoSQLite database. We'll use here Firebase real-time database in order to get the real-time updates, of course, and we'll also consume Firebase storage where you can store your files like images, docx, ppts, etc. So talking about our application, so in our application we have three features. So first, authentication feature where user can sign in or sign up itself. Apart from this, after this authentication, we navigate to the notes feature where user can see all of their previously been saved notes in a form of list, and when he click any of them, eventually he will navigate to the add edit screen where he can add or edit their previous notes. And the last feature is shared note feature. So this screen shows all of the notes which user might want to share all of their peer users. So this will contain all of the list of that type of notes. So this is what we have in this project. Talking about technicality, so we will use here multi-module approach. Apart from this, we will use clean architecture with MVVM pattern. We'll use dagger hilt, we'll use composable, we'll use navigation, all of the basics things, of course. So first thing first, you need an Android project. So go and create a new beautiful project for yourself. It's very easy and very straightforward. Next, we want to use here Firebase. So in order to use Firebase, you need to create your Firebase account, and after that open up your Firebase console. So it looks something like this. So here I want to create a new project. So I'm using create a Firebase project box and click on it. Over here you can give your name. So I'm gonna use here FireNotes. Okay, so this is my project name. Click on the continue. If you want to use its Gemini feature, you can simply enable it. Of course I want to use it, so I'm gonna leave it as enabled. Click on the continue, just click on continue one more time. You can choose your account. So I'm gonna use my default account for Firebase and create a project. So it will take a moment to build my project, and after that we will navigate to the project dashboard screen. Okay, so my Firebase project is ready. Click on the continue. And there we go. This is our Firebase dashboard. Now I want to connect my Android app to this project. How can we do it? Well, it's very easy. Let me show you. So first thing first, you need to click on this Android icon. And over here, you need to mention your package name, your application nickname, and SHA1 fingerprint. So let me just grab all of this information for you. So for that, you need a project. So create Android project for yourself. It's very easy. And after that, just change the mode from Android to project. And after that, we need to find three things: the package name, the nickname that we can very easily give it by ourselves, and lastly the SHA1 fingerprint. So first, let's grab the information for our package name. So go to your application module build.gradle.kts, and this is my package name. So I'm gonna just copy this thing and paste in here. So this is done. Now application nickname, so I'm gonna use here FireNotes 3. And lastly, we need to find this SHA1 key. So for that, what you need to do, simply open up your terminal by click over here and run a task ./gradlew signing report. So this will give you all of the signing information, which you can see over here. So we have a store, alias, MD5, SHA1, SHA256. So we are interested in this SHA1. So copy this stuff, go back to your Firebase, simply paste in here, and boom, we are done. Now register your application. So this will provide me a Google services.json file which contains all of the information, and Firebase will eventually use this information to validate genuinity of our application, whether it is genuine or not. So I'm gonna simply download it, click on the next. Okay, so my file is downloaded. So what I can do, I can simply open my downloads. And as you can see, this is my download. This is my Google services.json. Now simply drag this thing and put in your app module, and that's it. Okay, so this is my Google Services JSON. As you can see, it contains all of the key value pairs which eventually uses by our backend to validate the application is valid or not. Cool. So we are done with this. And now it's time to attach all of the dependencies which we need in order to connect my application Android app with Firebase. So as you can see, this will provide me a lot of plugin and lot of dependency which I have already added in my libs version toml file, which I'm gonna show you later. Click on this next, and yes, we are done. So continue to the console. That's it. Our Android application is now been connected with our Firebase project. So let me just drag this thing and put it in my second screen. Let me show you the dependencies that I have been already added in libs version toml file. So for that, go to your Gradle libs version toml file, scroll up. So here you can see I have added all the dependency which is related to Firebase, like Firebase Analytics, authentication, BOM database, Firestore, storage, and storage KTX. Scroll down, you will see few dependency for Tiger Hilt, for navigation. This is for Kotlin serialization and Coil Compose. So Coil is actually used to download images with the help of URL. Scroll down, you will see certain plugins, and we are eventually interested in Google services, Kotlin serialization, and Dagger. Okay, so these are the dependencies that we will use in this project. So now it's time to create few module. As I told you, it is a multi-modular project. So I'm going to create here 3 modules. So first module is authentication, second module is notes, and last module is shared note. So let's create that module first. So right click on your FireNotes YouTube, a project, new module, and I'm going to create an Android library for my data layer and UI layer. Domain layer must be Java or Kotlin library, because some of my viewers said to me, we cannot use Android library for domain layer because domain layer usually doesn't contain anything which is related to Android framework, and that is 100% right. So let's create here few modules. So first I'm going to create my notes UI layer. In the package, I'm going to call it Dev Himanshu Notes UI. Finish it. So this is my notes module that contains UI layer. Similarly, I'm going to create one more module for my data layer. Make sure the package name is always unique, otherwise it will give you error while compile time or runtime. So notes.data, finish it up. And lastly, I'm going to create one more module which represent my domain layer. As I told you, domain layer usually doesn't contain any kind of Android framework related thing. That's the reason why I'm going to create this thing in a form of Java or Kotlin library. And I'm going to call this domain. Make sure to change this package name from Dev Himanshu domain to Dev Himanshu notes domain. Finish it up. Okay, so now we have 3 layers: data layer, domain layer, and UI layer for my notes feature. Similarly, I'm going to create one more module, and this time I'm going to create for authentication. So authentication data, finish it. Next, I'm going to create my UI layer. So authentication UI, finish it up. Lastly, my domain layer. So this time I'm using a Java or Kotlin library, and I'm going to call this auth domain. And over here, I'm using auth domain. Finish it. So now we have 2 features, authentication and notes. Next is shared note feature. So Android library, shared dash notes. First, I'm going to build my data layer, shared notes. Finish it up. This is done. Now create one more module for your UI layer and make sure it's an Android library. Finish it up. Now create one more module which is Java or Kotlin library, and this time we have domain. Make sure to change the package name from Dev Himanshu domain to Dev Himanshu shared note.domain. Finish it up. Okay, so we are done with the module creation. Now we have 3 features: authentication feature, notes feature, and shared note feature. Now it's time to attach all of the dependencies. So first, open up your root level build.gradle.kts, and over here we need to add our Firebase plugin, which is libs plugin Google services, apply false. Similarly, we need to attach one more thing, libs plugin dagger, apply, false. So these are the plugins that we might use. Okay, open up your application module build.gradle.kts, and over here surely we will use our plugin for Firebase, and also we'll use our dagger. And one more thing, with dagger we need to use our Kotlin annotation processor. So simply use this ID to attach KAPT in your project or in your module, not in your project. Okay, so we are pretty much done. Now over here I'm gonna attach few dependency. So like over here I'm gonna add dependency for my Firebase so that we can use Firebase services in our Android project. So for that I'm using here implementation, and this is a platform libs Firebase BOM. So this will enable Firebase platform for our Android project. Next we're gonna use here our dagger hilt, libs dagger hilt and KAPT for annotation processing, and use here KAPT. Done. Sync your project. Okay, so everything is pretty much set up. Now it's time to begin with our authentication feature. But before that, our application module surely knows all of other modules. So what I can do, I can simply attach the connection or establish a connection between them. So first we'll have authentication UI layer, then we have domain layer, and then we have our data layer. Now duplicate this thing. Same goes for nodes. Simply copy these nodes, paste in here, and one more time simply duplicate these three layers, and this time we have shared dash nodes. Copy these shared nodes and paste in here. Sync your project and everything works well. So let's begin our journey with authentication domain module. So in authentication domain module, I'm gonna create here few packages. So first package is for our model, which will represent my domain model, and the next package is for our repository. As you already know, in domain layer we have this repository interfaces, and the implementation of these interfaces will be provided by our data layer. So first let me create model classes. So in this model I'm going to create a data class, and the data class name is user. In this user we have UID, we have user email, and lastly we have its display name. Type is string. So this is my user. Now in this repository I'm going to create an interface, and the interface name is auth repository. So first thing first, I'm going to create here a login naming function which will take email and password, and return type of this thing is flow. Make sure this flow is coming from coroutine, and if I show you, this is not present over here, so we need to add dependency for this. Well, in this module we cannot use something which is somehow related to Android framework, because this is a Java or Kotlin library, but Kotlin coroutine is entirely dependent on Kotlin frameworks. That's the reason why we can very easily use here Kotlin coroutine. So go to your build.gradle.kts and simply add the dependency. So implementation libs Kotlin x coroutine core. Sync your project, come back to your authentication repository, and after that this flow is available. So you can see over here it is coming from Kotlin x coroutine.flow, and instead of using resource I'm going to use here result. This is not a boolean type, it will return me type of user. Make sure this user is coming from again domain model. So that's it. This is for my login. Similarly we'll have registration. We need to pass email, we need to pass password, type is string, and return type of this thing is flow. Result of type user. Next we have a function for logout. We have one more function which will provide us get current, naming is get current user, and this will provide us information about the current user. So we have four functionality: login, registration, logout, and get current user. Now it's time to write its implementation, and usually according to clean architecture we will write its implementation in my data layer. So this is my authentication data layer. Over here, go to your build.github.kts and add few plugins and dependency. So first, I'm gonna use my plugin for Firebase. Next, I'm gonna use plugin for my Dagger, and lastly the Kotlin KAPT. That's it. Scroll down, establish connection between your data layer and domain layer so that data layer knows about your authentication repository. So to do that, we'll use here implementation, project, authentication, domain. Now below to it, I'm gonna add few more dependency. So first one is for Firebase, so we need to include this platform lips Firebase BOM. So this will include Firebase for this module. After that, we're gonna use here Firebase authentication because we want to perform login and registration, which is somehow related to Firebase authentication. So this is my Firebase authentication dependency. Next, I'm gonna add here lips, not plugin, we'll use here Dagger Hilt, duplicate it. Next we have Kotlin annotation processor, which uses KAPT. And yeah, we are pretty much done. Sync your project and we are good to go. Cool. So we are done. Now in this data layer, I'm gonna create repository, and in this repository I'm gonna create a class, and the class name is auth repo implementation. So auth repository override all of the methods. In order to do login and registration, we need Firebase authentication instant. So just inject it. Private variable Firebase authentication, simply import it. Now we have instance of my Firebase authentication. So let's do some login and registration things. So as you can see, the return type of this function is flow. So usually when we want to convert callbacks into flow, we'll use callback flow. Okay, as you can see, name suggests itself, this is something which is actually used to convert your callback into flows. So in this, we'll use await clause, which is mandatory. Now over here, I'm using my Firebase authentication, and in this we have sign in with email and password functions. So I'm gonna use it, pass my email and password. If everything goes well, we'll receive the success listener, and this will provide me my Firebase user. And if anything goes wrong, we'll use here add-on failure listener, and this will provide me the exception. So I'm using here try send. Now try send is a function which will emit values to this callback flow. Now in this try send, what I'm going to do, I'm going to use result.failure and simply pass my exception. So what will happen if our sign in has been completed successfully? So for that, we'll use here Firebase user. In this we have user, and I'm gonna use here .let scope function. Now in this, I want to use try send result.success. As you can see, the return type of this thing is result of type user. Now in this, we're gonna create an instance of our user, simply specify all of my argument, and now I'm gonna use it.uid, it.email or empty, it.displayname or empty. That's it. At the end, I'm gonna return this callback flow. I hope you got the point. Why I'm using here callback flow? What is the use case of callback flow? Well, similarly, we're gonna perform registration. So for the registration, I'm using here callback flow, and in this callback flow, I'm gonna use await clause. Now in this callback flow, I'm using my Firebase authentication. Create user with email and password. Simply pass your email and password. Add-on success listener will provide you Firebase user. I'm gonna use my Firebase user, and eventually I'm gonna simply emit values. So try send result.success. We have here user. Simply specify all of the remaining argument by name. It.uid, it.email or empty, it.displayname or empty. That's it. Now what will happen if anything goes wrong? So eventually we will land up on add-on failure listener, provide us exception, use try send result.failure and emit the exception. That's it. Return it. So that will do the registration. For the logout, it's very easy. You can simply use your Firebase authentication and perform sign out. If you want to get the information regarding the current user, you can use your Firebase authentication dot current user. Let convert it in form of user. Simply pass your UID it dot email or empty it dot display name or empty, and at the end return it. That's it. We are pretty much done with my authentication repository implementation. Now it's time to provide this. So for that, I'm gonna create a new package naming DI, and in this DI I'm gonna create an object, and the object name is auth data module. I want to install this thing in singleton component. This is a module, so simply use here module annotation. Now over here I'm gonna use here singleton provide function, which will provide me Firebase authentication instance, Firebase auth. Import it. Now I'm gonna use here return Firebase authentication get instance. Again I'm gonna create one more provide function which will provide me authentication repository implementation. So import it, these two. Okay, so we are pretty much done with our authentication module data layer. Now we are continuing our journey within our UI layer, but before that let me create few use cases within our domain module. So for that, let me create here package, and the package name is use case is something which contains a single responsibility. Like in our authentication repository, we have 4 different functionality: login, registration, logout, and get current user. So each use case represent a single responsibility. That means for login we have separate use case, for registration we have separate use case, for logout we have separate use case. Similarly for the get current user. So let's create it. First we have login use case, and in this I'm gonna use my authentication repository. We have here operator function invoke. We need to pass email and password. Type is string, of course. We'll use here authentication repository login email and password. That's it. Similarly we need to create one more use case for our registration. So registration use case, this is a class. Again I'm gonna inject my authentication repository operator function invoke, mention your email and password or pass as a parameter. Use authentication repository dot register email password. That's it. Next we have to create a logout use case. Operator function invoke authentication repository logout. This is a suspendable function, so make sure to use here suspend. Nice. Lastly we have get current user use case. User use case private wall authentication repository. Make sure to import this. Suspend operator function invoke authentication repository get current user. So we are pretty much done with all of our use cases within our authentication domain module. Now set up Dagger Hilt in our project. So for that, go to your Android app module, and in this build.github.kts, make sure you have already added all of this Dagger dependency, and on the top Dagger plugin with KAPT coordination processor. Now here I'm gonna create a new class, and the class name is base application. This base application extends application class, and make sure to annotate this thing with Hilt Android app, and at the end we need to register this application over our manifest. So go to your manifest, and here within your application tag use name and mention your base application. Now the most important thing here is to take permission for internet, and we are pretty much done. So Tiger Hilt is pretty much set up for our project. Now, as you can see in our authentication domain module, we cannot use Tiger Hilt, but we want to inject these use cases in our UI layer. So it is possible only when you use inject within your use case constructor, or you should provide it. Now, as you can see, we cannot attach this use case directly using inject annotation within our Tiger Hilt graph. What we can do, we can provide these use cases within our application module. It is very much possible because application module knows all of the other modules within our project. Now, I'm going to create a new package naming di, and in this di, I'm going to create an object, and the object name is auth domain module. So the sole purpose of this module is to provide use cases. So first I'm gonna install this thing in our singleton component. Make sure to import this, and after that annotate this thing with module. Now I'm gonna write all of my provide function. So first provide function will provide get current user use case. Return type of this function is get current user use case. Return it get current user use case, and the requirement of this thing is authentication repository. So simply pass as a parameter and use it. So auth repository. So this will provide get current user use case. So let me just make sure the spelling is right. So provide. Okay, next I'm gonna duplicate it, and this time I'm gonna provide my login use case. So simply copy this stuff, login use case, paste in here and here to import it. Again, I'm gonna just duplicate this stuff, and this time I'm using here register use case. That's it. Copy this register use case, paste in here and here too, and at the end simply import it. Now we need to provide one more function which is actually used to log out. So remove this register use case, use here logout use case. Copy this logout use case, paste in here and here too, import it. Okay, so that's it. This will provide all of our use cases that we can inject in our project. Now scroll down, it's time to begin our journey with UI module of authentication feature. So first thing first, what I need to do is in our build.gradle.kts, I'm gonna add dependency for Tiger Hilt. So I'm using here alias lips plugin for Tiger. One more thing, I'm using Kotlin KPT, and that's it. Scroll down in the dependencies section. We need to add few dependencies used to connect this UI layer with our domain module. So for that I'm using here, this is my authentication module, and I want to connect my UI layer to authentication domain. Next I'm gonna add dependency for my Tiger. So lips Tiger Hilt, duplicate it, KAPT. Remove this implementation and use here Kotlin annotation processor. Okay, so we are done now. I'm gonna simply sync this project. Okay, so it's done. Now I'm gonna create main activity within my UI layer. So let's wait, go to this activity gallery and simply create this activity. So by doing this, it will automatically attach all of the dependency which we want to use composable screens. Now simply remove all of this thing because we do not use them. As you can see, it added all of the things that we want for composables. Now here I'm going to create a new file, and the file name is auth screen. Next I'm going to create view model. So auth view model. Next for this authentication view model, extend view model to inherit all of its property, and annotate this thing with Hilt view model. And I want to inject few use cases in this, so I'm using here constructor injection. Inject constructor, import inject. There we go. Now in this constructor I'm gonna inject two use case. So first I'm using here login use case. Import this login use case first. This is present in our domain layer. Next we're gonna use our register use case. So that's it. Now we have two use case within our authentication view model. Now I'm going to create here few mutable state flow fields. So first one is actually used to hold email address. So email type is mutable state flow and initial value is empty string, and I want to create one more email which is nothing but as state flow. So email as state flow. Next I'm going to create one more variable which actually holds my password. So mutable state flow empty string. Next we're going to create one more password variable which is state flow. Okay, lastly I'm going to create one more variable is login. I'm using here mutable state flow and the initial value is true, which is a state flow, is login as state flow. Now I'm going to create here three function which is used to update these parameters. So first we have here on email change. We're going to pass our email and this will eventually updates my email. That's it. Now I'm going to create one more function which eventually updates my password. So on password change, password type is string, password update my password, and I'm going to create one more function which is used to update this login. So on toggle change, and over here I'm going to use is login update and I'm going to simply revert its value. That's it. So we have three mutable state flows and three functions which is actually used to update my mutable state flows respectively. Next I'm going to create a function for login, and in this I'm going to use my login use case. So login use case, we're going to use our email value and password value, and on each emission we'll receive the result, and if our result is successful, that means we'll retrieve the information about the user. Otherwise we'll receive some kind of error message, of course. So this is for the login, and I'm going to launch this thing in my view model scope. And if you want to use IO scope, you can create it by yourself. It's not a big deal. By default view model scope uses the main thread. So yeah, there is some performance issues, but if you are concerned about performance, you should create a new code in scope and use dispatcher.io. That will work because it eventually delegate all of your work on IO thread. But here it is not the case. It uses main thread, which is slightly wrong. So it's totally up to you, but I'm going to use your view model scope just for my convenience. Okay, so this is for the login. I'm going to create one more function which is for the registration. And over here the process is pretty much same. Register use case, we need to pass our email value and password value, and on each emission we're going to collect the result and check. If the result is successful, we retrieve some data. Otherwise we'll receive the exception, and eventually I'm gonna launch this thing in my view model scope. So we have here two things, login and register. Now it's time to use it. So in order to use it, we need to create complete authentication screen. Go to your authentication screen and it's time to write our user interface. So I'm going to create a composable, and the composable name is authentication screen. Just below to it, I'm going to create a composable authentication screen content which holds all of its content. I'm going to use here a column, and this column has modifier fill max size. Now within this I'm going to create a text which tells our user that this is a email text. Just below to it I'm going to create my text field, but just before that I want space, so I'm using here modifier. Height is 8 dp. Import this dp. Next we're going to use here text field. Now we need to pass here value and on value change. So in order to pass value, I want to take that thing in a form of parameter within our composable, which is email. And if my email changes, for that I'm going to use here a lambda. Okay, so this is email value. This is on email change trailing lambda, which actually used when user type anything to my text field. So in place of value, I'm gonna use my email, and if anything got changed, I'm using my on email change. So this is for my text field. I'm gonna use here modifier fill max width. One more thing, here in the column I want to attach padding horizontally of, let's say, 16 dp. Okay, so we have a column, we have text spacer and text field. Now I'm gonna simply duplicate this stuff, and this time I'm having my password. I want to give some space, so I'm using here modifier height. So we were using 8 dp in between our text and text field, so here I'm using 12 dp. That's it. We have two text field, one is for the email, one is for the password. So password value and password lambda, we need to pass it in a form of parameter, just like this. In place of email, just change this thing to password, and here use on password change, and we are pretty much done with our text field. Now I'm gonna use here spacer, modifier height would be 24 dp, and just below to it I'm gonna create my button. So this button is used when you want to perform login or registration. So in order to tackle both situation, like sign up and sign in, what we can do? Well, we can pass the is login parameter, which we have already been created in our authentication view model. As you can see over here, is login. So I'm gonna utilize this parameter. So is login, type is boolean, and if on toggle change will work fine for us. So this is login tell us whether the user wants to log in or register. So we'll use here is login. So if it is a case of login, our button says sign in, right? And here on the click, I'm gonna pass this click event to my parent composable, like on login and on register. So if this is a case, I'm gonna use here on login, and pretty much done. I want to attach here modifier. So modifier fill max width, and I wanna give the height of 45 dp. So this is for the login. Now for the else, I'm gonna just duplicate this button, paste in here, and this time I wanna sign up. Okay, so we have two things. So if it is a case of login, we want to sign in. If it is a case of registration, we'll use this button which says sign up. Now just below to it, I'm gonna create one more text, and this text says create an account. So if user click on this particular text, we can toggle. So modifier clickable, and in this clickable we'll use on toggle change. Similarly, I'm gonna just copy this stuff and paste below to my button, and this time I'm gonna say this. So this time if user click on it, we're gonna simply toggle our is login flag. So we are pretty much done with the UI. UI is very basic, not some fancy UI, but yeah, this will work. And on the top, I'm gonna create a text which says FireNotes, and I'm gonna use here style which is coming from material theme typography. Title large would be good. Apart from this, I'm gonna pass modifier fill max width, and I want alignment on the center. So text align, we have here center. Cool. And also I wanna give some space. So modifier height of 24 dp. Yeah, we are pretty much done with our auth screen content. One more thing, as you can see, we did not use this on register, so let's use it over here. Instead of using on login, use here on register, and yeah, we are pretty much done. One more thing, what will happen if user click to this button of sign in or register? We want to show a progress bar. For that, go to your authentication view model, and here on the top I'm gonna create one more variable naming is loading, which represent mutable state flow. Initial value is false, and I wanna create one more variable which actually used to expose this mutable state flow in a form of state flow. Now when we start this flow, I want to update my is loading. So is loading update to true, And as soon as we receive the result, we'll use is loading update to false, or if anything goes wrong, we'll encounter that thing here in catch, and in this catch I'm gonna use my is loading value update it to false. Similarly, I'm gonna do the same thing for my registration. So here we have on start is loading update to true, and if we receive the result, we'll use here is loading update false, and if anything goes wrong, we'll use here catch is loading update to false. Okay, so now go back to your authentication and in this authentication screen content, we're gonna pass is loading name boolean. Scroll down. So this if else branch is only visible if is loading variable is not true. So in the else, I'm gonna put this if else condition. So just cut this thing from here and paste it. Now in the case of loading, I'm gonna use your box having modifier fill max width content alignment is on the center, and we have circular progress indicator. And yeah, we are pretty much done with our user interface. Now it's time to use this authentication screen content in our authentication screen. So first thing first, I'm gonna create my view model with the help of Hilt view model. Okay, so in order to use this Hilt view model, we need to add dependency. So for that, go to your build.gradle.kts, and here I'm using lips Hilt compose navigation. Sync your project and go back to your authentication screen. As you can see, now it is available. Import it, and here I'm using authentication view model. Now we have email. So view model email collect this thing in a form of state which is attached to the composable lifecycle. Similarly, we have password. So view model password collect this thing in a form of state which is attached to my composable lifecycle. Similarly, we have is loading and is login. Now I'm gonna use my auth screen content, specify all the argument with name. So we have here modifier. So use your modifier fill max size. Next is loading. So pass it. Next is login. Simply pass it. So on toggle change. For that, I'm gonna use my view model on toggle change. For email, I'm gonna use my email. For on email change, I'm gonna use my view model on email change. For the password, I'm using my password. For the on password change, I'm gonna use my view model on password change, and for the on login, I'm gonna use my view model login, and for the registration on register, I'm using my view model register. That's it. Alright, so we are pretty much done with our authentication screen. Now we need to set up our navigation thing. For that, go to your application module and here create a new package, and the package name is navigation. So in order to use navigation, we need to add few dependencies in our build.gradle.kts. So go to your build.gradle.kts file, scroll down, and at the bottom, I'm gonna use here implementation, lips navigation for compose, sync your project. By the way, you will get all of this dependency from my GitHub repo. Okay, syncing is done. Now back to our navigation package, and here I'm gonna create an interface. Name is base nav graph. Now in this base navigation graph, I'm gonna create a function naming build, and in this build we have parameter modifier, we have our nav controller, nav host controller, and lastly we have our nav graph builder. Okay, so we are pretty much done with this build function. It's time to use it. So as you can see, we have three features. We have nodes feature, we have authentication feature, and we have shared node feature. So each module, or you can say each feature, will have its separate navigation. So for that, I'm going to create object, an object which represent the navigation graph for each feature. So first I'm going to deal this thing for authentication feature. That's the reason I'm going to call it authentication nav graph. Okay, this will use my base navigation graph, override the build function, and here we'll use nav graph builder navigation. So in order to use nested navigation, what we require two things. We require destination for this nested navigation and destination for all of the screens that you want to mention under this navigation subgraph. So for that I'm going to create a sealed interface naming destination, and here I'm going to create a data object, and the data object name would be authentication. So this is a destination for my composable. Next we need to create a destination for this nested navigation subgraph. So data object, I'm going to call this root, use destination with it. Now use serializable. Now it's time to use these destinations. So for the nested navigation I'm going to use my destination root. Now for the start destination I'm going to use my destination dot authentication. Now within this I'm going to mention my composable, and the composable destination is destination authentication. Within this we'll mention our authentication screen. Make sure to pass our modifier. And yes, we are pretty much done with our authentication navigation graph. Now it's time to set up this whole nested navigation thing for our application. Go to your main activity. So now we'll use here navigation host. So the requirement of navigation host is nav host controller and start destination. So let's create nav controller with the help of remember nav controller. Pass it. Next, start destination. So this is start destination is coming from our authentication nav graph destination dot root. So this destination represent our nested navigation graph. Now within this I'm going to create a list of base nav graph, because base nav graph is an interface. So all of the objects or classes that uses base navigation graph, we can easily pass it in here. So we'll use your authentication nav graph and iterate it, and in this we have a function naming build. So it dot build, we need to pass modifier. So modifier padding, mention our inner padding. Next we need to pass nav host controller, so pass nav controller, and lastly the nav graph builder. So this nav graph builder represented by this. Okay, so we are done with the navigation setup. Now it's time to use here Android entry point, and we are very much good to go. Now it's time to execute our application and see whether everything works as expected or not. Alright, so our application crashes, and if you check out the Crashlytics, it says something is related to serializable annotation. So I think I got the issue, and the issue is go to your build.gradle.kts, scroll up, and here we need to use plugin for serialization. So Cortinex.serialization. You need to enable this authentication. So for that, open up your build, go to this authentication, click on this get started. So we have here various ways to authenticate our user, but we are interested in email password. So click on this, enable it, and I do not want to use this password. Let's sign in. So I'm gonna remain this unchecked. Now simply save it. And yes, now email and password method is enabled. Alright, so our app is executing. Now in the email I'm gonna use himanshu@gmail.com, and in place of password I'm gonna use 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. You make sure you will use more than 6 characters, and I want to perform sign up. So just use this sign up button and click on it. Okay, so let me just open my Firebase dashboard. Here you can see the user. Refresh it. So this is my email, which is himanshu@gmail.com, and it is successfully authenticated. Okay, so sign up is working as expected. Now let's see whether sign in is working or not. So in order to check sign in, what I can do, I can create few breakpoints and execute my application in debugging mode. Alright, so in the email, I'm gonna use himanshu@gmail.com. In password, I'm gonna use 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. And when I click sign in, you can see it hit this particular breakpoint, which is present within our Firebase user.user. That means login has been successfully completed. Authentication feature, we saw how to use Firebase authentication with email and password. It's very straightforward. It's very easy to use authentication with Firebase. So yeah, that's it for this authentication feature. Now we are going to move on with our next feature, which is notes feature. And in notes feature, we will use Firebase Firestore, Firebase real-time database, and Firebase storage.